there is a single scene that encapsulates the downfall of the Umbrella Academy the best.
But that always fails because our family is the problem.
This single scene, this one line, is so amazingly, fascinatingly destructive towards the very DNA of the show. So chat, riddle me this. Are we supposed to be surprised over this? Are we surprised that the show managed to completely nuke its own themes, character building, and execution? I cannot say that I am. There are multiple reasons for that. This train wreck wasn't derailed by a single issue, but the writing was on all of the walls and in a couple of different fonts too. So let us dive right into this mess and see what exactly caused the downfall of the Umbrella Academy. The show has an interesting quirk that it revolves around. Every season's plot is powered by an apocalypse, a doomsday that is right around the corner that our heroes are supposed to foil. On paper, this might seem cool, because the whole show focuses around a dysfunctional family of superpowered siblings that were born randomly on the same day to women who weren't even pregnant at the start of their day. 7 of these super special magical kinders were adopted by a person named Reginald Hargreaves, and raised to be a small team of soldiers to fight crime and whatnot. The original premise of the first season is not very unique, but it's cool. But here is the problem. The show then proceeds to use the same premise every season. And I kid you not, every season's plot can be described as our main characters have to stop the apocalypse. Yes, my friends, today I am making the big allegation that it is exactly the show's gimmick that has caused the show's downfall. At the length of 4 seasons and operating under these premises, the show was always doomed. Now, to explain where I myself am coming from in all of this, here is a little fact about me. I am actually very into creative writing. I have been practicing it for years at this point, and meanwhile I am not in no way an expert, I do think I have somewhat of an understanding in how narratives tick, and what it takes to get them made. And while yeah, my specialty isn't really screenwriting or film, but rather literature and prose, that is what I studied in uni, the narrative rules are still pretty similar. That is why I was simply perplexed to see the second season use the apocalypse premise after the first season. Season 1 handled it decently, but the apocalypse still happened. What else was there to do with it? Surprisingly, the second season handled it well enough too. But the thing about using apocalypses as a premise for every season is that you inevitably introduce an element of repetition. And preferably, the one thing you do not do in fiction is repeat yourself. But if you do, there has to be a very strong reason for that. I have already discussed this on this channel before, with the Downfall of You video, that repetition absolutely can have a deeper meaning in it. Repetition should, if it is used at all, be used to drive a point home. And there was apparently a point that was being driven in the show too, that wherever the Hargreaves siblings went, they would be causing an apocalypse. But now, let us be pragmatic about this, shall we? This is a very shit idea. The show shot itself in both feet and their left hand as soon as they chose to continue down this path. It was never going to work, and here's why. If I was a writer on the show, I would be pulling my hair out by the time they had to write seasons 3 and 4. It is already a miracle that the first 2 seasons worked out relatively okay. From a purely creative writing perspective, having an apocalypse every season is completely unsustainable. I cannot describe to you just how much my internal writer is screaming at this in pain. Because first, let us consider the stakes. Every season literally has world-ending stakes. Earth would be destroyed, life on Earth would die, main characters die. Destruction of the world in narrative writing is pretty much as OP as you can get. There is a reason why the Magicians took 5 seasons to come to the point of an apocalypse. The stakes literally cannot get any higher than that. This also affects character motives. Each season character motives remain somewhat static. They all obviously want to save the world. There is variation, but still they are pretty much the same. Then we get to the fact that you have to come up with at least 4 different and unique ways the world ends. Then you also have to fill out 4 entire seasons with content and arcs. That already is incredibly hard. Then you also have the fact that the show decides to have time travel. Time travel is already an element that only has so many ways to go. It puts the entire show into an even smaller box in terms of storytelling than it already was. Then you have to remember that this is based off of comics, and the first 2 seasons already drew considerable inspiration from them and didn't leave as much material. All around, the circumstances just create a scenario where any story is not sustainable for a longer run, and all of this directly results in seasons 3 and 4. I kind of dislike throwing this term around, but I think there is no other way to describe the latter 2 seasons other than being creatively bankrupt. The show plunges downwards in ways never really seen before, goes down paths that are baffling and mystifying at the same time. You can already guess that I dislike season 3, but what I absolutely hate in it is the first episode. The whole season is already iffy, but the first episode in particular is so stupid that the stupidity generates gravity. This season wastes absolutely no time in showing how stupid the show will become from this point forwards. So the last season finale saw the main characters travel back to their original time, year of 20-something, but they find out that the time shenanigans that they did back in 1960s had an effect on the timeline, and they find that their father decided to adopt other kids instead of them. Instead of Umbrella Academy, Reginald Hargreaves finds the Sparrow Academy. Admittedly, an interesting idea. Not that the show realizes that idea in any meaningful way. So the Umbrella Academy meets the Sparrow Academy, and then the show does something so baffling it's laughable. They make the Umbrella Academy not understand how timelines work. Immediately, the Umbrellas begin yapping about how the Sparrows are in their home, and then they proceed to fight them over it? Bitch, what? Oh, and do not even get me started on all of the quirky stuff they decide to throw in there. I get that the show has its own flair and flavor, but it really pisses me off upon a rewatch. So they managed to include a little interlude where the two academies have a dance-off. Now listen, do I get the charm of it? Yes, I kind of do. I kinda sorta low-key understand why the scene has 20 million views on YouTube. But on a rewatch, I have to be honest, it is so grating to see the scene again. It is sandwiched in such a dumb sequence of events to begin with. But this scene, and all of the other quirky stuff that they will pull out during the season, is the equivalent of the show annoyingly smiling at you while serving you a plate of shit. It becomes annoying after you realize that the show's writing is rapidly declining. In the middle of this nonsense, Luther begins smiling like a big idiot towards one of the new characters, a Sparrow Academy woman named Sloane.
Hi, I'm Luther.
Okay.
The show proceeds to push them liking each other really hard.
Hey, I'm sorry. Are you okay?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sloane.
Which again, looks kinda stupid. I like their ship, but it's really rushed. So then they fight, and then the Umbrellas finally get the good sense to leave. They get to the hotel. Then Victor has the bright idea to go behind everyone's back and meet with one of the Sparrows on his own. You gotta love the fact that this comes after like 2 seasons of the show trying to display how siblings are learning to reconnect and work as a team. And immediately after those 2 seasons, one of them just goes ahead and does whatever the hell they want without any consultation with others. And then you find out that this meeting between Victor and number 1 of the Sparrows is being watched. Then number 1 goes into the basement of their home and discovers that there is a huge ball of energy called the Kugelblitz, just hanging out there for plot reasons. Well, he, also for plot reasons, instead of being reasonable and deciding to get the hell out of there and alert everyone else, decides to just touch it. Because that is definitely what you should try and do upon encountering an unidentified sphere of violent energy inside your home. And guess what? He dies. No way. This happens so that the show could manufacture conflict between Sparrows and the Umbrellas, since this leads Sparrows to believe that the Umbrellas kidnapped their brother. Then we have Allison's little tangent. Victor tells her that
you need to go home. Hug your daughter.
You should go to the airport. Get back to your real life.
this is due to Allison's desire to reunite with her daughter that she had all the way back in season 1, in a timeline that was subsequently destroyed. She then, honestly like an idiot, listens to Victor and proceeds to trespass into random people's home to try and find her daughter. Obviously, she doesn't find her daughter there. What? So this woman thinks that in a timeline where she was not even adopted, and where she would have lived a completely different life, she would have the same daughter. Honestly, I do not even know what to say. How even? The entire first episode is just stupid choice after stupid choice after stupid choice stacked on top of each other, and all of this is supposed to plant seeds for the whole season, which is why, from the get-go, whatever outcome of this season, I am immediately biased against it. And honestly, enough of making excuses, this is just dumb at this point. Then we find out what the doomsday of the season is. Remember the ball of energy, the Kugelblitz? So they proceed to explain that it is caused by the grandfather paradox, which is probably the weirdest application of this concept on screen to date. So to briefly explain this, there is this man named Harlan that has powers. Back in season 2, when he was still a kid, Victor somehow managed to give him powers, and because of that, Harlan is now connected to everyone via Bluetooth? And on the day the kids were supposed to be born, he felt them as fetuses, and therefore killed their mothers before they were even born. But the way they explain it is so odd. So the show explains that because the women were killed before the kids were born in this timeline, this creates a grandfather paradox. Because if the women were killed before giving birth, how can the kids exist? Except, that is not how that even works. Okay, this is a completely different timeline. The women that were killed were not the ones that gave birth to the main characters. They are alternate versions of the women who did. Harlan killing these women shouldn't have any effect on these characters because this is not even their origin. The show operates on weird rules of time travel in general and have always done so. Even back in the first few seasons, it didn't exactly line up. But with Google Blitz, they reach a new dimension of nonsense.
Hello Divas, Alphas, and Sigmas, Editing Andrew here. My explanation was kinda giving idiot, so here's the thing. The whole thing with Google Blitz, it actually made sense back in Season 3. At least it made more sense than it did after Season 4. Like, this review was written after I saw all of the seasons and I saw how they changed the rules of time travel in the last season. So yeah, actually in Season 3, the Google Blitz kinda makes sense. But with Season 4, they changed the rules because originally the timeline was a single timeline, meaning as in like single continuity, whatever they went back and changed. It wouldn't branch off, it would just stay the same timeline. But in Season 4, they established that it's actually a multiverse and it has like multiple timelines, whatever. So yeah, Season 4 fucked it. Yeah.
I like it how there were countless explanations they could have used to explain it. They could have literally said anything else, and it would have made more sense. Then there is also the matter of Ben. The original Ben is dead, but the Sparrows have an alternate version of him. So the main characters keep referring to him as if he was their actual brother. Seriously, they bring it up so many times it is astounding. Another layer of world building that they add this season is making Five the founder of the Commission, an organization that protects the timeline, which is the path of least resistance. You mean to tell me that the one person who inherently has the power to time travel made the Commission?
No way, really? So original.
Then there is also the fact that the entire season takes place in a frigging hotel. The color grading looks awful, the set doesn't even look good, which makes it a flop season not just contents-wise, but also visually. I do dislike just how much they rely on characters being stupid to make the plot work in general. It is cheap, and it does show that they had no other ideas. So the season ends with a reset. Apparently the main characters hack the mainframe and manage to reset the universe as a whole before it completely collapses, and emerge out of it without any powers. And I honestly thought that this would be the end. So for the next and final installment, they pull a bit of a Game of Thrones in all the ways you wish they didn't. They proceed to cut the season, giving it 6 episodes instead of 10. And that worked out as well as you would expect. The season made very little sense, felt like it had nothing real to say about the characters and was completely useless. Now let's be positive about the season for a second. I happen to actually like some of the concepts presented in the season. First, the Apocalypse this season called The Cleanse sounded dope at first. As a bit of a final boss, I think it makes sense thematically, since it is intended to basically fix the timeline from branching out. Again, on paper, we will get to this. I also happened to like the idea of the timelines bleeding into each other and leaving behind artifacts. I also like people having other memories that are from other timelines, kinda like collective Mandela effects. These concepts are actually really cool. They are very much on theme for a potential final season, but oh god, do they fumble the bag so bad with this one. Remember how they lost their powers last season? Well, the show decides to give the power back almost immediately, and the characters just have to drink a few shots from a vial they just happened to find. And then they are sent on a quest to find a young woman named Jennifer. She apparently just spawned into this world out of nowhere in a giant squid. Get it? Because the show is quirky. She has something called Durango particles, which are opposite of marigold particles and yada 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 yada, I don't care. The whole explanation is convoluted and barely makes sense. We could go on about how there are many inconsistencies this season, but this has already been done. And since I am not like the other girls, and I am completely different and unique and quirky, instead I want to focus on the ending. You see, the funny thing about the ending is actually something that is technically correct, but very stupid in the wider context on multiple levels. So the characters basically commit the S-word. They sacrifice themselves and then proceed to cease to exist in order to erase all other timelines and return things to normal. They basically pull a dark move out of their asses for this one. This was all a dream level move, if you may. Under normal circumstances, such an ending would work in a very narrow number of cases. I mean, just think about it. Erasing everything the show builds up is not exactly something that is very exciting. On that note, let's look at a show like Dark, where such a twist actually works. Now, the thing about Dark is that in its concepts, it's not extremely original. It has a time machine sort of mechanism and people just travel in time. It also includes just about every possible time paradox and anomaly that there is. That is all there is to it, really. But what really sets it apart is the fact that, first of all, it is very meticulously planned out. And second, it speculates on the effects of time travel in a grounded and sensical way. It absolutely has a deep an unshakable internal logic that is so airtight, you can hear it crunch. The show has an amazing way to show what sort of disastrous consequences time travel could bring in the most extreme way by creating this big knot of perverse connections. And it is due to the show's ability to display just what a disaster that the time travel generates that you take one look at this twisted web and think, yep, that's the only way to do it, that's the only way to finish that. The same logic barely, if at all, can be applied to the Umbrella Academy. Sure, the kids go around and cause apocalypses. They are the problem, as the show tries to convince us, but with just how undercooked everything was, you cannot help but see it as a cop-out, because oh yeah, the show also has time travel. They made such a huge mess of everything. They didn't even bother to explain it in a coherent manner, and just decided to nuke everything altogether. There are still more things to say about this dumbass ending, but let's look back before we do, shall we? Yes, this is the epic, inevitable point where I am raising the question of, was the Umbrella Academy ever good? To answer that question, yeah, it was. I don't think there is any doubt in that. Yet it was never without its flaws. Let's look first at its plot. The first season's plot is kicked into motion by the fact that Number 5 returns from the future and tells his siblings that an apocalypse is incoming. As a catalyst, it is pretty weak. The whole idea of a messenger from the future telling the characters that they need to prepare for something because a huge plot point is coming in the future is just not really it. It is trite, it is contrived, and it is a convenience. The first season isn't really helped by the fact that it's just hell of a predictable. What, did anyone think that they focused on that one person in the family who was supposedly the black sheep without any powers just because? Then we also have the fact that there are a lot of things that happen because the characters act idiotically and are incapable of talking to each other. That should be the point. We are dealing with a dysfunctional family here, but only up to a point, yet the show turns that up to 11 sometimes. Then you also have the fact that they went with a cliche ending, because as it turns out, it is them who caused the apocalypse. It also turns out that their dad knew about the apocalypse all along, and that is why they were trained, so it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then they do a little thing where Victor is about to cause the apocalypse, and then they all come together and friendship wins, but oh no, Victor accidentally shoots a power blast right into the moon and so the world ends, but it is actually a whoopsie. Then you also have the fact that they use a strange convenience of teleporting Klaus back in time, have him fall in love and become a war veteran who loses his lover in the trenches. While the idea might be deep and cool, let's not kid ourselves. This is a very flimsy way of rushing character development for Klaus. Then there is Season 2. Season 2 can be a bit annoying, in a sense that it just repeats some things from the first season. Apocalypse, it's there, therefore the stakes are the same. One of the first obstacles back in Season 1 was getting the family back together to work as a team. It was a psychological obstacle. Then Season 2 separates them physically, so we still have to work through things to get the family back. Slightly different, but still same principle. Then we also have the fact that Victor apparently causes the apocalypse again. But I think the most annoying part for me is that they kinda sorta repeat Victor's arc. First time around, he was unaware of his power because he was made to forget about it. Then it slowly built up to him regaining all the memories surrounding it. Then in the second season, Victor gets hit by a car and gets amnesia. A very original and fresh storytelling device. Then he gets to relearn who he is again. I could tolerate it in the first season since it was done relatively well, but thwarting the story in this way again is just a bit cheap. But it isn't the plot that the show really shines at. The first few seasons, even if cliched a tad too much and contrived in some ways, were not really about the apocalypses. The why behind the apocalypses was way more important than the fact that they happened. Yes, I am about to deliver the most important and most original revelation. The show was always about characters. Yeah, you can stop clapping now. And on that token, here's another revelation for you. The show might have an originality and idea problem, yes, but after the first 2 seasons, it has an even bigger problem. It doesn't have what to say anymore. Now let's think about the apocalypses that the show focuses on for a second. Yes, they become gimmicky, but they didn't start out that way. What is it that causes them? The first season has an apocalypse that I think is quite cool when you think about it. It is caused by Reginald Hargreaves, who creates this dynamic within the family. It is Reginald who establishes a dynamic where Victor is left out and constantly neglected. This causes the other kids to also treat him in a very specific way, which then makes Victor go out and write an entire book which causes the other kids to further distance themselves from him, with this entire cycle culminating in an apocalypse. I think it works great as a nice metaphor of how traumas and miscommunication can cause huge damage. It is an insane hyperbole, but it freaking works. I loved it. The cause here is the problems that are raised by the way these siblings coexist. That is their issue, the way they relate to each other and what type of relationship relationships they have with each other. The villain is certainly not Victor, but Reginald Hargreaves. It is a very telling progression to see the second Apocalypse be actually thwarted. Yes, the siblings managed to save the day and avert it all together. You could say that this presents a progression, that they finally got their stuff together as a team and grew, since they did change their approach towards Victor and managed to prevent him from causing another doomsday. Damn, you could even say that this presents a breaking of a cycle. There is something to be said here about this progression, that the plot somewhat reflected how these characters grew. The plot was made to service these characters and their growth, so all of that is friggin' great. So now that the show dragged the conflict of their cohabitation out for 2 seasons, they really can't do that for much longer. Are they a perfect team? No, but I think they already learned the majority of the lessons needed to understand how to work with each other. And this is where the show no longer has anything to say about these characters as a team. And this is exactly where it begins failing on multiple levels. They do a quirky thing. They change the thesis behind the apocalypses from the problem being their cohabitation to the problem becoming their habitation. The narrative switches the causes of the last 2 apocalypses and makes their mere existence a problem. What a humongously stupid decision that is. Now, if you don't frigging remember, the first 2 seasons were very big on the fact that these kids were severely traumatized and had a lot of stuff to deal with. They had no real parents, only Reggie and a robot woman to take care of them. They received no real warmth, no real nurturing connections, nothing. They were cucked all around, and the first 2 seasons displayed the characters overcoming that. Beautiful story, one might say. It's the stuff that makes people relate, which brings us all the way back to this scene.
But that always fails because family is the problem.
For the show to go around and then say that it is their existence in general that causes the apocalypses is first of all thematically fucked, and second of all, narratively fucked. Imagine saying to these kids, who barely got any semblance of a normal life, that are just trying to get through it, that the sheer fact that they are just there is what causes the world to end. Yeah, you thought you could live and move on? Well, fuck you can't and you should die. I want to give the show the benefit of the doubt, but I am not sure it is warranted. Whoever wrote these seasons probably didn't realize the implications. It doesn't make the situation a ton more better, but that's what it seems like. Because the later 2 seasons truly did not have anywhere to go really, with these characters as a team, but they wanted to have their little gimmick, which was always misguided. But since they like to dig themselves a nice comfy grave, they went ahead, I guess. And you can really see just how out of ideas the show is during the later 2 seasons. Take for instance Luther during the 3rd season. He just got a rushed romance storyline with a wedding that barely had anything to do with anything, only for the next season to not have his wife at all and for it to go nowhere. Then we have Klaus, and they did our boy Klaus dirty. Season 4 sees him be trafficked for his power and him going on a whole side tangent while being buried in a grave. Nobody really cares that it happened. It doesn't really advance the character, but hey, it is there, so deal with it. They trap Lila and Five together and make them have a rushed romance for absolutely no reason. The only person who has something of substance is Allison, but she proceeds to sexually assault her brother, which is then forgotten and never brought up again. We get to see Lila and Diego have their trials and tribulations during the later 2 seasons, yet that barely factors into anything. Victor is off doing his own thing, first with Harlan, then just hanging out in the last season. Honestly, what else is there to add? This is simply what happens when you have nothing more to say. Let's be real, the apocalypse thing already doomed the show from the get-go. Can it be made work? Yes, but it requires a lot of time and effort to nail down and actually write. It is also just very obvious that they had nothing more to add after the first 2 seasons. I think they would have benefited immensely if they just dropped the apocalypse thing after the first 2 seasons, since they already had their point made. To me, Umbrella Academy ended in season 2, when they went forward in time and got to live the rest of their lives in relative peace. I think it is just time to normalize stopping when you're out of ideas. And on that note,